I was standing in my garage, staring at a half-assembled bookshelf, when I first got the feeling that something was off. Not just, I put the shelves in backward off, but the kind of off that makes your stomach clench, like when you realize you've been driving in the wrong direction for 30 minutes but convince yourself you meant to take the scenic route. Now, I'm not a carpenter. I'm barely even a man who should be trusted with an Allen wrench, but Susan had decided we needed a more organized home, which, in our marriage, was code for, I've seen a Pinterest post, and now your weekend is ruined. I'd spent the last 45 minutes in a battle of wits against Swedish engineering, and let me tell you, the Swedish were winning. Badly. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of laughter. But not just any laughter. The kind of laughter you recognize instantly, even from a distance. The kind of laughter that tells you someone is having a really, really good time. And it wasn't just Susan's voice I heard. Now, I should preface this by saying our house isn't exactly built for mystery. It's not some sprawling mansion with secret wings and dimly lit corridors. It's a 4-bedroom suburban home with walls thin enough that I can hear when my neighbor sneezes 2 doors down. But the thing is, Susan wasn't home when I started this project. She had mentioned something about running errands, which, in our marriage, was code for, I'm about to spend $200 at Target while pretending I came in for toothpaste. But now she was home, and she was talking to someone. At first, I figured she was on the phone. Maybe a FaceTime call. Maybe laughing at some ridiculous story from her sister about how their mother had once again accused the thermostat of being possessed by demons. But as I walked toward the back of the house, the laughter didn't have that usual phone call delay. It was fluid, natural. It was the kind of laughter people share when they're looking each other in the eye. And that's when I saw them. Now, I'm not saying I walked in on anything explicit, because that would be an entirely different kind of story. No, what I walked in on was, in a way, so much worse. There was Susan, sitting at our kitchen table, grinning like a high school girl at prom, across from a man who was very much not me. He was tall, built like someone who probably enjoys going to the gym instead of considering it a punishment from the gods, and had that annoyingly casual confidence of a guy who had never in his life experienced the sheer humiliation of losing a battle against an IKEA bookshelf. The guy was holding something in his hand, twirling it between his fingers while Susan watched, completely enthralled. And then, I heard it. The words that, to this day, are burned into my brain. You're so good with your hands. Now, there are a lot of things a man can hear in his own kitchen that will ruin his day. The sink is clogged again. We need to talk about our budget. Your mother is coming to stay for a month. But that's a special kind of emotional gut punch. I cleared my throat, and the room snapped back to reality. Susan's head jerked up, and for a split second, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Something guilty. Something panicked. The guy, on the other hand, barely flinched. In fact, he looked downright amused. Oh, Susan said, forcing a smile that was about as natural as a taxidermied squirrel. William, you're home early. I looked down at my watch. It's 4:30. Right, she said quickly. I just meant, well, I thought you'd be working on that bookshelf longer. I glanced at the man still sitting at my kitchen table. Yeah, well, the bookshelf and I have decided to take some time apart. You know, personal differences. Susan let out a nervous laugh, like that might somehow smooth over the fact that she and Mr. Perfect Forearms here had just been engaging in what I could only describe as aggressively flirtatious behavior. And you are? I asked, turning my attention to him. He grinned, sticking out a hand like we were meeting at a networking event instead of in the middle of my growing marital suspicion. Ethan. Ethan. Of course his name was Ethan. Nice to meet you, Ethan, I said, shaking his hand, making sure to grip just a little too tight. And what exactly brings you to my kitchen today? Oh. Susan jumped in, a little too quickly. Ethan's just, helping me with something. I raised an eyebrow. With what, exactly? Susan opened her mouth, but before she could come up with what I'm sure would have been a truly award-winning excuse, Ethan smirked and leaned back in his chair. She wanted to learn something new, he said smoothly. Figured I'd teach her. I swear, I could hear the alarm bells going off in my head. But I played it cool. That's so, I said, crossing my arms. What exactly are you teaching my wife, Ethan? Susan shot him a look. A warning. But Ethan? Oh, Ethan didn't take warnings. No, Ethan just grinned wider. Sleight of hand. I blinked. Come again. He held up a deck of playing cards and shuffled them one-handed like he was performing at a Vegas casino. Magic tricks. Magic. This guy, was sitting in my kitchen, making my wife giggle like a teenager, because he was teaching her card tricks. I looked at Susan, waiting for her to tell me this was some kind of weird joke. But no. She just sat there, looking equal parts guilty and mortified, like a kid caught sneaking an extra cookie before dinner. Right? I said slowly. Because when I think of things my wife has always wanted to learn, magic tricks are definitely at the top of the list. Susan let out a nervous laugh. Well, Ethan, the absolute genius that he was, decided this was the perfect moment to demonstrate. He picked up the deck, did some elaborate shuffle, and then slid a single card across the table toward me. Go on, he said. Take it. I looked at him, then at Susan, then at the card. It was the King of Hearts. Oh, the irony. I picked it up, twirled it between my fingers just like he had, and smiled. Nice trick, I said. You know what else is a good trick? Ethan grinned, waiting, getting out of my house before I decide to start learning axe throwing. The man had enough sense to take the hint. Susan, however, had some explaining to do. Ethan left. Well, actually, Susan practically shoved him out the door while throwing me nervous glances like I was some unpredictable lunatic who might suddenly pull out a chainsaw and demand a full confession. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching the whole thing with the kind of calm that makes people nervous. Ethan, being the kind of guy who probably owned at least 3 different leather jackets and considered himself a bit of a lone wolf, gave me a smug little nod before disappearing into the world where men like him thrived, gyms, motorcycle dealerships, and probably the self-help section of bookstores. Susan shut the door and turned around like she'd just defused a bomb. William, before you say anything. You know what's crazy? I cut in, pushing myself off the counter. I was starting to like Ethan. She blinked. What? Yeah, I nodded. I mean, sure, he's the human equivalent of a Bluetooth speaker at a beach party, completely unnecessary, but somehow always there. But he seemed like an alright guy. And now? Now I have to hate him. I let out a dramatic sigh. And I hate hating people. It's exhausting. Susan pinched the bridge of her nose like she was the victim here. You're overreacting. Am I? I tilted my head. I walk in on you, sitting across from Discount Houdini, whispering sweet nothings about his hand skills, and I'm the one overreacting? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like, Susan? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. A classic Susan move. She always did that when she was buying time to come up with an excuse so weak even she didn't believe it. I held up a hand. You know what? No. I don't even want to hear whatever nonsense explanation you're about to throw at me. Instead, let's do something fun. Let's pretend I'm stupid. Just for a second. Susan exhaled through her nose, already regretting every choice that led her to this moment. William. No, just go with it, I insisted. I'm a complete moron, right? I don't know anything. So, tell me, in great detail, how you and Ethan the Magnificent ended up in our kitchen together, giggling like 2 teenagers skipping algebra class. Susan rubbed her temples. Wait, let me guess, I interrupted. You were walking down the street, minding your own business, when suddenly, Ethan appeared out of thin air, poof, and said, Hey, Susan, I'd love to teach you card tricks in your own home while your husband isn't around. And you, being the charitable soul that you are, said, Why, of course, Ethan. Come right in. Let me make you some coffee while you impress me with your finger dexterity. Susan glared at me. Are you done? Not even close. She groaned and dragged a hand down her face. I met him at the community center. Ah, the community center, I said, nodding as if this explanation made everything crystal clear. Where all married women go to pick up casual magicians. I wasn't picking up anyone, William. I was taking a class. A class? Yes. On what? She hesitated for just a second too long. I gasped. Was it magic? Her jaw tightened. I grinned. You were taking a magic class. She lifted her chin. Yes. Okay. I nodded. Now I have to ask. Why? Susan crossed her arms, like she'd somehow flipped the situation and was now the one being unfairly interrogated. Because it seemed fun. Fun, I repeated. And in all the years I've known you, magic has never come up as a hobby you were remotely interested in. But suddenly, out of nowhere, you had an undeniable urge to learn how to pull quarters out of people's ears. She shifted her weight from foot to foot. People try new things, William. Right. And out of all the things in the world, you landed on magic. She exhaled sharply. I don't need to justify my interest to you. Of course not, I agreed. But here's where it gets interesting. See, when most people take a class, they usually, what's the word? Oh yeah, attend a class. Instead, you decided to bring the class home. Specifically, into our home. Specifically, into our kitchen. Specifically, when I wasn't here. And specifically, with Ethan. Susan shifted again. He offered private lessons. I almost lost it right there. Oh, did he? She groaned. William, you're making this into something it's not. I clapped my hands together. Oh, okay, let's try this again. Let's say I met a woman at, I don't know, the hardware store. And she happened to be an expert in power tools. And I thought to myself, gee, I'd really love to learn more about power tools. I should take a class. But instead of actually going to the class, I invited her over for a private lesson while you weren't home. And then, when you walked in, you heard me say something like, wow, you're really good at handling that drill. Would you be totally fine with that? Susan's eyes narrowed. That's not the same thing. I gasped again. You're right. Because in my scenario, power tools are actually useful. Susan turned away, muttering something under her breath. Sorry, what was that? I called out. She spun back around, exasperated. I said, nothing happened. Oh, well, if you said it, then it must be true. I shot back. I mean, after all, who am I to question my loving wife, who just happened to be sitting at our kitchen table, alone with a man who was clearly flirting with her? He wasn't flirting. I barked out a laugh. Susan, he could have been wearing a t-shirt that said, I'm flirting, and it wouldn't have been more obvious. She crossed her arms. You're being dramatic. Tell you what, I said, holding up a finger. Let's put it to the test. Let's call Ethan right now and ask him if he was flirting. Susan's face turned the exact shade of a guilty person who has just realized they are, in fact, very guilty. I smirked. What's wrong? Cat got your tongue? She huffed. I don't have his number. Ah, yes, I nodded. Because nothing says innocent friendship like not even having the person's phone number. Susan threw up her hands. I can't believe we're even arguing about this. Yeah, me neither. I agreed. It's almost like someone put us in this position by inviting a magician into our home for private lessons. Susan looked at me, and for the first time, I saw it, the look. The one that said she was done arguing. The one that meant she was about to shut this down with some final, dismissive statement. And then she said it. You're just being insecure. And just like that, the real problem wasn't Ethan anymore. It was Susan. Oh, I'm insecure? I repeated, letting the words settle in the air like a bad smell. That's the argument you're going with? Susan crossed her arms, looking at me like I was some kind of malfunctioning robot that needed to be rebooted. Yes, William, you're blowing this completely out of proportion because you're insecure. I stared at her. Right. That must be it. Has nothing to do with the fact that I just walked in on my wife having a private magic lesson in our kitchen with a man who was looking at her like she was the grand prize on a game show. Nope. Definitely just my own deep-seated insecurities at play here. Susan sighed dramatically, the way people do when they're just so burdened by the stupidity of the world around them. You're twisting this into something it's not. Am I? Because from where I'm standing, it looks a whole lot like my wife invited some guy over when I wasn't home and then got all giggly and flustered while he shuffled cards at her. You're being ridiculous. You know what? Maybe I am, I said, nodding. Maybe I'm just a paranoid lunatic. Maybe Ethan isn't some guy who has a habit of spending his free time entertaining married women in their own homes while their husbands are out. Maybe he's just a selfless community member, going door to door, offering hands-on magic lessons out of the goodness of his heart. I should probably be thanking him for his services. Susan let out a sharp breath. I don't know what you want from me, William. I rubbed my jaw. Well, an apology would be a good start. For what? For learning something new. For making me feel like a fool in my own house. Susan rolled her eyes so hard I half expected her to get dizzy. You always do this. I blinked. I always do what? Turn everything into some huge issue. Oh, I turn everything into an issue? I laughed. Right. Because I'm the one sneaking magicians into the house when you're at work. No, wait. That's you. Susan threw up her hands. Oh my God, William. I didn't sneak anyone in. It wasn't some big secret. Ethan was just helping me. Helping you what, Susan? I shot back. Improve your card shuffling technique? Unlock your hidden potential as an amateur magician? Susan clenched her jaw. You're impossible. No, I'm just not a fool, I said. And I'd really appreciate it if you'd stop talking to me like I'm some clueless moron who should be honored that my wife is having cozy little private lessons with another man. Susan exhaled through her nose like she was practicing meditation instead of being caught in a situation she clearly didn't want to be in. I told you already, It was nothing. You're making a huge deal out of something completely harmless. I studied her for a long moment. She was holding her ground, that much was clear. But there was something else there too. A shift. Like she had decided this was her battle to win now, and if she just stood firm long enough, I'd be the one to back down, which only made me more certain that I was right. All right, I said, stepping back. Fine. Maybe I am insecure. Maybe I am making a huge deal out of nothing. Susan's shoulders relaxed just a fraction. Finally. But you know what's funny? I continued. I just can't shake this weird feeling I have. She frowned. What weird feeling? I shrugged. Oh, just that something about this whole situation doesn't add up. Can't quite put my finger on it. Maybe it's the fact that you were practically shoving Ethan out the door like you were trying to get rid of a crime scene. Maybe it's the fact that you look like you'd rather swallow nails than have this conversation. Or maybe, just maybe, it's the fact that you keep deflecting instead of just admitting that something shady is going on here. Susan's face twitched, just for a second. Nothing shady is going on. Sure, I nodded. And if I called Ethan right now and asked him what was really going on, he'd say the exact same thing? Her jaw tightened. I already told you, I don't have his number. Right, I said. Because when you're receiving private lessons from someone, the last thing you need is a way to contact them. Susan crossed her arms. I don't know why I even bother trying to explain things to you. You've already made up your mind. I tilted my head. You know, you're right. I have made up my mind. But not because I'm insecure. No, I made up my mind because I've been married to you long enough to know when you're lying to me. Susan flinched. Just barely. But I caught it. William, that's not fair. What's not fair is being treated like a complete moron in my own home. I shot back. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to drop the whole poor me. My husband is so insecure act, and you're going to start telling me the truth. Susan's eyes darted to the side for half a second before locking back onto mine. I'm telling the truth. I smiled. Then you won't mind if I do a little digging. She stiffened. What does that mean? Oh, just that I suddenly have a burning curiosity about your new little hobby, I said. Maybe I'll swing by that community center, ask around. See if Ethan's running any other private lessons for married women. Susan's face went pale. William. Or maybe I'll just talk to Ethan directly, I went on, ignoring her. See if he's willing to do a little magic trick for me. You know, make the truth appear. Stop it. Why? I smirked. You have nothing to hide, right? Susan swallowed hard. I waited. Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Then, finally, she let out a shaky breath. William, please don't do this. And just like that, I knew. She wasn't worried about me making a fool of myself. She wasn't worried about some ridiculous misunderstanding. She was worried about what I was going to find. Susan wasn't the type to beg. She was the type to twist the situation, spin it into something where she somehow became the victim, and I was the unreasonable one. But this, William, please don't do this, nonsense? That was new. That was panic. That was fear. That was a flashing neon sign that I had been absolutely right to trust my instincts. Why not, Susan? I asked, tilting my head. Why don't you want me to look into this? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her eyes darted away. She was trying to calculate, trying to find the right answer that would shut this down without making her look guilty. The problem was, she had already lost that game. You're being obsessive, she tried. It's weird, William. Going to the community center? Confronting Ethan? It's embarrassing. For who? For us, she snapped. Do you really want to be the guy harassing some poor guy over nothing? I nodded slowly. Interesting argument. Really solid. One small issue, though. If it's nothing, then why do you care? Susan inhaled sharply, nostrils flaring. Because I just do. There it was. No real defense. No actual logic. Just desperation. I smiled. Okay. Susan blinked. Okay. Yeah, I said. Okay. I'll drop it. Her whole body relaxed in an instant. Good. Thank you. I gave her one last long look before heading toward the garage. Where are you going? She called after me. To finish that bookshelf, I said over my shoulder. She let out a long breath of relief, like she thought she had just dodged the bullet of the century. The thing about people like Susan? They never realize when the bullet has already left the gun. I had no intention of going to the community center. That would be too obvious. Too predictable. No, Susan would be expecting that. She'd be waiting for me to charge in there like some jealous lunatic, demanding answers from Ethan, making a fool of myself in public. Then she'd use it against me, Tell all her friends how crazy I was, how controlling. That's why I did something better. I found Ethan's car. It wasn't hard. People like Ethan always have the same kind of car, something expensive but impractical. Something that makes noise but doesn't do much else. And since I had memorized the make and model from when he pulled out of my driveway, all it took was a little drive through town to find where he actually spent his time. And surprise, surprise, he wasn't at the community center. Ethan, the supposed selfless teacher of magic, was at a barber shop. A very specific kind of barber shop, the kind where men don't just get haircuts. They get their egos polished, their confidence boosted, their delusions of grandeur reinforced. And I just sat outside, watching. Because the thing about men like Ethan? They all have the same habits. They're predictable. And it didn't take long for my patience to pay off. Less than 20 minutes later, he walked out of the shop, looking exactly like the kind of guy who spends more time styling his hair than working an actual job. And as he slid into his car, I did the easiest thing in the world. I followed him. Ethan, it turned out, was an incredibly boring person. He went to a smoothie place, sat outside, scrolling through his phone, nodding like whatever he was reading made him a philosopher. He went to a gym, walked in, stayed for about 15 minutes, and left without looking remotely sweaty. Probably just there to do a few dramatic stretches in front of the mirrors. Then, finally, he went home. Or at least, what I assumed was his home. A condo complex. Fancy, overpriced, the kind of place where guys like Ethan lived when they weren't busy pretending to be self-made entrepreneurs. And that's when I got to work. See, most people, when they find out their spouse is cheating, they go for the obvious move. Screaming match. Divorce papers. Maybe some dramatic public scene that gets caught on video and goes viral for a day. Not me. I don't do basic. I do effective. 2 days later, I put my plan in motion. Ethan was still living his best life, completely unaware that I was systematically ruining it. Step 1 had been easy. A few phone calls. A little digging. And just like that, I had Ethan's real job. Not some high-profile, mysterious career. No, Ethan was a sales rep. For vacuum cleaners. Not even a good brand. Step 2 was even easier. A few fake emails. A little pretending to be a dissatisfied customer. And suddenly, Ethan's manager was calling him in for a serious conversation about inappropriate conduct with clients. Apparently, Ethan had a history of getting a little too friendly with married women who bought vacuums from him. Who would have thought? Oh, right? Me. But step 3? That was my favorite. Step 3 involved Susan. I waited until she got home from work. Watched her move around the house, completely oblivious to the fact that her little secret life was about to crumble. Then, casually, I pulled out my phone. Hey, Susan. She looked up from the couch, suspicious. What? I held up my phone. Guess who I just got a message from? Her face barely changed, but I could see the flicker of nerves. Who? I smiled. Ethan. Her whole body tensed. Oh yeah, I continued. Turns out, Ethan is really upset. Something about losing his job. Some big misunderstanding about his inappropriate relationships with clients. And guess what? His girlfriend found out. She's not happy, Susan. Susan's eyes widened. His what? Oh, didn't you know? I grinned. Yeah, Ethan's been in a very committed relationship. Well, was in a committed relationship. Until his girlfriend got a lovely little tip about some of his extracurricular activities. Susan's mouth opened, then closed. Funny thing about people like Ethan, I said, sitting down across from her. They always think they're smarter than they actually are. But they never cover their tracks as well as they think they do. Susan swallowed hard. William. I held up a hand. Oh, don't worry. I haven't exposed you yet. That would be too easy. No, I want you to sit here, knowing that at any moment, your perfect little world could come crashing down. That at any second, I could make sure everyone knows exactly what you've been up to. Susan's face paled. You wouldn't. I leaned in, lowering my voice just enough to make sure she heard every word. Try me. Susan was quiet for exactly 2 days. That was her first move, silence. Some people throw tantrums when they're backed into a corner, but not Susan. No, she liked to act like she was the calm one, like she was thinking 10 steps ahead while everyone else was just scrambling around in panic. Which was hilarious, considering she was the one whose carefully managed little secret had just been blown up. She wasn't sleeping well. I could tell by the way she tossed and turned at night, her breathing uneven. She was still trying to calculate, trying to figure out her next move. Then, on the 3rd day, she finally made it. It started with the casual comment. The one that wasn't actually casual at all. You know, she said over breakfast, stirring her coffee with a little too much focus, I've been thinking about our finances. There it was. I smirked. Oh yeah. She nodded, not looking up. Yeah. I mean, let's be honest. Things have been rocky between us for a while now. Oh, for sure. I agreed, taking a sip of my own coffee. Definitely got rocky around the time I caught you sneaking a magician into our house. Susan clenched her jaw. This isn't about Ethan. I chuckled. Oh, it is, actually. Very much so. She set her spoon down. We need to be adults about this, William. I think it's time we talked about separating. I leaned back in my chair, grinning. Let me guess. You've already spoken to a lawyer. Her eyes flicked up to mine, just for a second, before she regained her composure. I just think it's smart to protect myself. You know, since you seem to be in such a destructive mood lately. I laughed. Oh, that's good. That's really good. You cheat, I find out, and somehow, I'm the one being destructive. Susan folded her arms. You ruined Ethan's life. Wrong. Ethan ruined his own life. I just gave it a little nudge. She inhaled sharply, steadying herself. Look, I want to be fair about this. I raised an eyebrow. Do you? Yes, she said, forcing a diplomatic tone. And to be fair, I think I should keep the house. I almost spit out my coffee. Oh, that's adorable. Really, Susan, I have to give you credit. That's bold. Absolutely delusional, but bold. She pressed her lips together. I put a lot into this home, William. I snorted. Yeah? Did you build it with your own hands? Did you pay for the mortgage? Because last I checked, I was the one covering most of the bills while you spent your money on whatever nonsense caught your eye that month. Susan sat up straighter. I have rights. Sure, you do, I said. And I'm sure whatever lawyer you've been talking to is filling your head with all kinds of nonsense about what you deserve. But here's the thing, Susan, you can try to take this house from me. You can try to make this divorce as painful as possible. But you seem to be forgetting something very important. She narrowed her eyes. What? I smiled. I'm better at this game than you are. Susan was nothing if not determined. She wasn't going to just let me win. First, she tried to turn our friends against me. I got the first clue when I received a text from Mark, one of my closest buddies. Mark, hey man, Susan's been saying some stuff. Might want to get ahead of it. I sighed. Of course she was. The problem with Susan's little campaign was that I had receipts. And unlike her, I didn't have to make anything up. So, while Susan was busy playing the poor, heartbroken wife who had been blindsided by my sudden aggression, I was busy sending screenshots of my conversations with Ethan's very angry ex-girlfriend. Screenshots that included Ethan's text bragging about his little side adventures, details of Susan's magic lessons that went far beyond card tricks, a delightful little message from Ethan himself, sent to a buddy, where he called Susan the easiest lay of the year. Word spread fast. By the end of the week, Susan wasn't getting sympathy. She was getting questions. Wait, you cheated first? I thought William was the bad guy in all this. Hold on. Why were you sneaking Ethan into the house? She hated it. She really hated it. Which was why she doubled down. Next, she tried work. I walked into the office Monday morning to find HR waiting for me. William, we need to talk. Oh, this was going to be good. Apparently, Susan had filed a complaint. Not with my company, obviously, because that would have been ridiculous. No, she had gone after a business partner I worked with, sending a long, dramatic email about how I was unstable and harassing her. Fortunately for me, the guy in question had known me for years. So, he said, barely holding back laughter, what exactly did you do to make Susan go full soap opera on you? I sighed. I exposed her little affair. Now she's trying to make my life miserable. He shook his head. Unbelievable. You want me to forward you the email? Please. I had a feeling I'd be needing it soon. Then, of course, came the legal attack. A letter from her lawyer arrived at my doorstep. It was exactly what I expected. She wanted the house. She wanted half of everything. She wanted spousal support. I actually laughed out loud at that last one. Oh, Susan. You never learn. I didn't respond. Not yet. I let her think she had the upper hand. Let her believe she was forcing me into a corner. Meanwhile, I was preparing something much better. Because while Susan had spent the past week throwing tantrums and trying to destroy my reputation, I had been quietly setting up the real move. The actual checkmate. It was going to be beautiful. Susan's biggest flaw had always been the same. She thought she was smarter than everyone around her. She played chess like she was some kind of grandmaster, but in reality, she was just the kind of person who made her first move with full confidence and then panicked when the other person didn't immediately crumble. The lawsuit was proof of that. She must have thought I'd be scared, that I'd be scrambling, hiring a lawyer, begging for a settlement. But she underestimated one crucial thing. I had been preparing for this long before she even knew the game had started. So I waited. I let her believe she was winning. Let her think she had me on the ropes. Meanwhile, I was putting the final pieces in place. And then, when everything was lined up just right, I made my move. The day of the court hearing, Susan showed up looking every bit the composed, graceful woman who was just so unfairly wronged by her tough, vindictive husband. She had that expression people wear when they think they're about to win big at a casino. The first 30 minutes went exactly the way she wanted them to. Her lawyer stood up, spun a dramatic tale about how Susan had been left financially vulnerable, how she had sacrificed for our marriage, how she had helped build our home, and now deserved a fair share. And then, finally, it was my turn. I stood up, straightened my tie, looked right at Susan, and smiled. "Your Honor," I said, "I'd like to present some additional evidence before we proceed." Susan's lawyer, looking mildly irritated, glanced at me. "What kind of evidence?" I pulled out a folder, set it on the table, and began. "First," I said, flipping open the first page, "here's the proof that I purchased the house on my own. Susan's name is not, and has never been, on the deed. That's important because it means she has absolutely no legal right to claim ownership." Susan's expression didn't change, but I saw her fingers twitch slightly. "Second," I continued, turning to the next page, "here's a detailed financial breakdown showing that I covered over 85% of our shared expenses. That means her claim that she helped build our life is, at best, a generous exaggeration." The lawyer shifted in his seat. Susan was gripping her pen a little too tightly. "But here's where it gets really interesting," I said, pulling out another document. "This is an affidavit from Ethan's ex-girlfriend. You remember Ethan, don't you, Susan?" Her jaw tightened. Ethan's ex was very helpful in explaining the timeline of their relationship. It seems Susan wasn't just having an emotional affair like she claimed. It was quite physical, and it had been going on far longer than she initially admitted. Susan's lawyer cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I fail to see how this is relevant." "It's very relevant," I said, "because Susan is claiming she's the victim here. But in reality, she's the one who broke the marriage contract first." Silence. Susan was looking straight ahead, her face blank. "And lastly," I said, flipping to the final page, "we have the fun part. Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence that Susan recently attempted to interfere with my employment by sending defamatory emails to my business partners. I have the emails right here, as well as testimony from multiple colleagues stating that Susan attempted to spread false claims about me in an effort to damage my reputation." Susan's lawyer actually winced. "And since Susan so kindly brought legal action into this," I continued, "I'd like to formally countersue for defamation and intentional interference with business relations. Given the evidence, I'd also like to request an expedited ruling to dismiss her claims and move forward with mine." The judge looked at me, then at Susan, then at the stack of evidence in front of them. It didn't take long. The ruling was swift. Susan got nothing. No house. No money. No support. She sat there, stone-faced, as the judge dismissed her case entirely and allowed my countersuit to move forward. And then, just like that, it was over. 2 weeks later, Susan packed up and left. She had to. With the lawsuit hanging over her, she didn't have the resources to keep fighting. She tried to make a scene one last time, standing in the driveway, glaring at me like I was the villain in her story. "You ruined my life," she said. I smiled. "No, Susan. You did that." And with that, she got in her car and drove away. The silence that followed? Best sound I'd heard in years. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel